Hello and most welcome to 1759. And we will today continue the article by Meredith J C Warren. The Cup of God's Wrath, Libation and Early Christian Practice in Revelation. And I need to remind everyone I'm using my web camera, well, color, that is to put a little note. I might go directly after this recording. We left off at page 5 after looking carefully into the cup and noting it is a beautiful existence. And well, it's very close to the previous lecture when Affeldt, Wittgenstein and Baker and all the others killed off the idea that the word can have meaning without doing. And the modern, I would say, Platonic trend or religion coming from the Greek is to take away all meaning in the religious language. We have seen how in the theological seminars, atheism is absolutely dominant. And if it's not atheism, it's a attuned, very, very shallow Christianity or religion. And I would say that is even more effective in dissolving religion. We must remember that for instance, in Sweden, participation has gone from 100% when it came to churchgoer in the late 19th century to less than 3%. These are the underlying pictures that changes everything. It makes it impossible to have free will. The observer disappears, the world exists by itself, and you know about most of those things. We mentioned different aspects last time, important things when it comes to see how word can gain their power by doing things, and libation is a ritual. In the olden days, in late antiquity, everything was done, and thereby words retained or upheld their meanings. This is why libation, other rituals, and liturgy is absolutely the sine qua non for any religious activity. There are few exceptions in the world. Modern Christianity in the West, the mixture between religion from Greece and West, is the only exception. We left off at pattern, and I do like the term divine reflexivity, in which gods are depicted as practicing and reinforcing their own cultic rituals. In this way, God demonstrates John's view of correct libation practice. These two major libation scenarios represent, on a large scale, Revelation's use of wine and cup imagery associated with the ritual of libation. Scattered throughout, there are also minor references to wine in 6.5 to 6, 17.2 to 6, 18:3 and 6-7, etc. These references contribute to the overall impression that libations and wine are employed negatively in Revelation. Few of these warrant brief treatment here. The wine reference in 17 is again used to describe what is abhorrent. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and bedecked with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and their impurities of her fornication. And of her forehead was written a name of mystery: Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and of earth's abominations. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. These verses, appearing just after the episode with the 7 bowls, strongly connect wine with fornication, with becoming drunk, and with the whore, Revelation's symbolic Rome. The term for the cup here is, the term for cup is here potirion, rather than the fiali, but potirion can still imply, as it does in Matthew and in Luke, a vessel containing liquid to be poured out as libation. In chapter 18, this connection is continued, and nations are drunk with the wine of the whore's passion. The whore herself will be repaid with a double draught. In the cup she mixed. Again, judgment against wrongdoers is imaged in terms of wine and drunkenness, in this case of a mixed cup. Mixed wine as well as neat wine was also used for libations, especially those in which the offerant would consume a portion of the liquid herself. Finally, 1915. The wine included is the product of the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God the Almighty, which clearly has dire implications of judgment and suffering, and which echoes the earlier function of the wine press in chapter 14. In sum, God's wrath comes from libation cups, and wine is almost exclusively used to indicate wrong ritual practice. Three, the religious context of libation imagery. The libation and wine imagery in Revelation is significant when examined in light of cultic practices in the ancient Mediterranean. Revelation's habit of subverting familiar religious and cultural elements plays a role here. John frequently takes familiar imagery from the Roman world and repurposes it, giving symbols with imperial associations a new interpretation that supports his own aims. Price's discussion of the cultic worship of the emperors notes that libations were a common element of this kind of sacrifice, but that in public festivals, incense and animal sacrifice were more prevalent. Libations, then, may have been more common at private incidents of worship toward the imperial cult, perhaps in associations as the regulations of the Choir of Rome and Augustus at Pergamum suggest. Revelation's concern with libation may then reflect concerns about private behavior among members of his communities rather than with their participation at public festivals. In the context of Revelation, where imperial worship is implied throughout the surrounding chapters, these libations evoke the wine offerings expected in Roman worship, as well as those made in the Jerusalem temple. Libations were a prominent part of daily life for most in the ancient world, and libation imagery from scriptures is employed to highlight Revelation's distaste for what its author views as the wrong religious practice. In other words, Revelation makes use of libation imagery from scriptures in order to point to familiar private libation practices in Asia Minor as wrong, in keeping with the text's overarching critique of Rome. Revelation directly evokes the language of cult throughout the text. The recitation of cultic element in 13:4, such as who is like, and the use of the verb proskineo, evoke biblical descriptions of cult, but inverted. Whereas in the biblical texts, the phrase who is like is used to positively reinforce the sole worship of God. Revelation puts the words in the mouths of those who incorrectly worship the beast, highlighting their cosmically inappropriate acts. Revelation also alludes to the imperial cult with its call to ecumenical or worldwide worship of the beast. That is Babylon, that is Rome. Like the use of incense to wreak havoc on the inhabitants of earth in 8:3-5. The libations are a specific reference to the worship of the goddess Roma in the imperial cult. Rather surprisingly, elements of cultic mimesis have been largely overlooked in scholarly discussion of the bowl plagues of Revelation chapter 16. It seems clear that the libation bowl plagues of chapter 16 represents a concentrated and intentional example of this pervasive allusion to cult, in which Revelation both critiques and subverts normative ritual behavior in its struggle to articulate what right worship entails for John's community of Jesus worshippers. True worship reveres the Lamb and the one who truly sits on the imperial throne. If it's clear that wine and libation imagery is used in Revelation in such a way as to imply God's judgment, that is to unleash suffering upon those who worship incorrectly and thereby participate fully in the sinful excess of the empire. In what context should we interpret the use of libations in Revelation? Preliminary, it is worth identifying any scriptural antecedents, since Revelation frequently relies on biblical sources for its imagery. Despite the public sacrificial context of the biblical descriptions of libation, they remain part of the literary toolbox used by Revelation to imagine the role of private libations in John's apocalyptic visions. Exodus 25:29 describes various sacrificial items for the worship of God. You shall make its plates and dishes for incense, and its flagons and bowls with which to pour drink offering, and you shall make them pure gold. Several other examples describe either the specialized ritual equipment necessary to offer liquids to God, or the offering of libations in general. While the instructions in biblical texts are vague about how precisely one went about making a liquid offering, it is clear from the number of references that libations were a normal part of ordinary sacrificial worship of the Israelite God, and therefore not automatically associated with wrong practice. Moreover, it is likely that libations at the Jerusalem temple persisted into the Greco-Roman period. There is no convincing evidence that worship at the Jerusalem temple declined during the period in the lead up to the temple's destruction in 70 Common Era. Even if for those in Asia Minor, such as the implied audience of John the Seer's letters, a more prominent example of libations might be those offered at banquets or in the public imperial cult. Nevertheless, the examples from the Greco-Roman era sources we do have strongly imply the continued practice of wine offerings. Philo is one such witness to sacrificial procedures in place of the Second Temple period. However, writing from an Alexandrian vantage point, Philo describes only vaguely the practice of libation. Here, Philo describes diaspora Jews journeying to Jerusalem. Countless multitudes from countless cities come, some over land, others over sea, from east and west and north and south at every feast, to enjoy a brief breathing space in scenes of genial cheerfulness. Friendships are formed between those who hitherto knew not each other, and the sacrifices and libations are the occasion of reciprocity of feeling and constitutes the surest pledge that all are of one mind. Philo is clear in another passage that corn, oil, and wine are things most possessing qualities, most profitable to life, and most necessary to human use, and therefore are naturally concentrated with all the sacrifices. Multiple other sources from Jewish antiquity confirm the continued practice of pouring out wine offerings, not all of which need to be examined in depth here. Josephus, in his Antiquities, likewise refers to libation of wine being poured out around the altar. We also find reference to libations among the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they shall rejoice on this day, for they began to pour out a strong drink offering, and new wine on the altar of the Lord, year by year. The Book of Jubilees likewise depicts Noah as sprinkling wine as libation of the sacrificial fire in 2:6:8 to 6:9. And although later a description in Mishnah Sukkah refers to an offering of wine and water at the festival of Sukkot. Therefore, it seems prudent to conclude that Jews in the Second Temple period were accustomed to include some form of libation with wine in their cult worship. However, in many texts, prior to and within the Second Temple period, libation is used as a trope to paint a vivid picture of a divine condemnation of wrong religious practice, especially of non-Israelites or non-Jews. It is this tendency that is more salient to the use of libation imagery in Revelation. It is clear that the author of the book of Revelation is indebted to the prophets of the Hebrew Bible who railed against the Babylonian oppressors using similar language of sacrifice and libation. For instance, as found in Jeremiah. The Hebrew Bible certainly shows some discomfort, or at least ambivalence, with regard to libations and drink offerings. Frequently, libations are spoken of as wrong and foreign. Jeremiah's provocative use of libation terminology is used to refer specifically to offerings made to the Queen of Heaven. A Babylonian goddess in opposition to the God of Israel. In chapter 44, in chapter 32, it is Baal and other unnamed gods who are the recipients of inappropriate worship, including libations. Jeremiah 51:7 is most strongly echoed in Revelation. Babylon was a golden cup in the Lord's hand, making all the earth drunken. The nations drank of her wine, therefore the nations went mad. The juxtaposition of libation imagery with foreignness and drunkenness is likewise found in Revelation 14:8. She, who made all nations drink the wine of her passionate immorality. Other sources, such as Deuteronomy and the additions to Esther, use libations similarly as a trope to point to wrong religious practice, particularly that associated with foreign oppressors. Deuteronomy 32:37-38 sarcastically asks why the gods to which libations had been poured are not coming to save the Israelites from God's wrath. Esther reports to God in her prayer, in the addition to Esther, that she has not honored the king's feast or drunk the wine of the libations. The biblical use of libations is reinterpreted in Revelation in keeping with its use of Babylon as a metaphor for Rome, another foreign oppressor, and is a focal point for its wine and libation imagery. The other source for the type of imagery that Revelation's author repurposes is Ezekiel, who uses pouring out language, and indeed the verb echeo, of many prophetic books in the Hebrew Bible that describes God's wrath. Ezekiel most consistently uses imagery of pouring out 11 times through the text. In each case, the wrath of God is described as being poured out, though no vessels are mentioned in Ezekiel, against the Israelites who have angered God by worshipping other deities or neglecting God's rules. In no instance in Ezekiel is the wrath poured out against foreign peoples in favor of the Israelites. Rather, God's wrath is reserved for situations where God's own people have intermingled their ritual practices with those of other nations. Curiously, in none of the instances in Ezekiel where the terminology is so close to Revelations does the author refer specifically to wine. No cup imagery is included. And when the wrath is described more exactly. It bears resemblance to fire. Therefore, while Revelation's reliance on much of the imagery of Ezekiel is clear in this and other instances, it is likewise the case that certain important distinctions can be identified between the two texts. Firstly, Revelation connects God's wrath with a specific liquid, wine. And secondly, the cups used for pouring out God's wrath are directly connected to ritual practice, since they come out of marked ritual space. It is in this context that we observe first how Revelation's liquid offerings highlight the cosmically inappropriate ritual actions of the whore of Babylon. Rome herself, whose libations the author simultaneously evokes and criticizes. Furthermore, in the light of Ezekiel's use of the terminology, it becomes clear how connected the whore's actions are to insider religious practice within the seer's own communities. Just as the pouring out of God's wrath in Ezekiel is connected to the Israelites' participation in foreign worship, so too in Revelation, it is not the actions of outsiders that is at stake, but the infiltration of those practices into his own congregations. In describing the whore's liquid offerings, Revelation cleverly parodies the highly structured ritual behaviors required by the imperial court and its cult. Virtually all meals in Greco-Roman antiquity would have likely included libations at some point of the dinner, honoring various gods. Libations during meals reinforced social relationships among diners, but also between gods and diners. As such, they were important in a very real economic way, bound up as was just about anything else in the honor-shame economy of the ancient world. world. Honor could be bestowed on a god by making an offering, and likewise on the person making the offering. Participating in a meal, including its libations, fostered and maintained business relationships, and non-participation could have financial and social ramifications. This is important when understanding how Revelation uses libation imagery, since the divine genius of the emperor was one such recipient of wine offerings. Moreover, since the Emperor Augustus' defeat of Egypt, all meals were technically obliged to include a libation to the genius of the emperor. The choice to offer a libation to the genius is thus a choice made about one's association with the emperor and therefore with the empire. This could have produced some anxiety for early Christian groups, given that early Christian gatherings followed a similar pattern to other group meetings in antiquity, which generally met for a meal, drink, and discussion. The use of such marked imagery, the pouring out of bowls in chapter 16, is therefore more fully understood in Revelation's imperial context. We make a stop there. Let's see where we are. And that's page 9. And we have 26. Let's see here. I saw many wondrous things in my read and go through. Let's go back to where should we go? On page 6, we have one. The third paragraph, including the quote from the very beginning there, where we have these verses appearing just after the episode with 7 bowls, strongly connect wine with fornication, with becoming drunk, and with the whore. See here how eloquently and elegantly doings that can have meaning, words that are meaningful, are used to show the whore, point to the whore, the Revelation's symbolic rule. We are not using dead concepts, but things that are used. Therefore, they have meaning. In modern parlance, we just say evil, but it has no meaning at all because it's an unused word in the language game. The cups, the bowls, the pouring out of liquid are all used, and drunkenness is something that you do. That means that the words signify something. They are not of zero extension, that most words today are. They are inept. A neurologist checked it out, and our motor cortex and our movement facilities do not react to those words like evil and so forth. But these things are in use, so they can be used to show something to someone, explain something, or as in this case, wanting people to steer away from this. The modern equality would be Rome is bad, and sort of piling up adjectives has no impact whatsoever because they don't mean anything. Further down, 1915, the wine, a little bit, please, just a couple of lines there, a bit more, 3, 4 lines. Still in the third paragraph on page 6. Up. Yeah. And here you see used things, mixed wine as well as neat wine was used for libations, especially those which the offerand could or would consume a portion of the liquid herself. Finally, the wine as well as the wine included is the product of a wine press of the fury of wrath of God the Almighty, which clearly has dire implications of judgment and suffering, which echoes the earlier function of the wine press in chapter 14. In sum, God's wrath comes from libation cups, and wine is almost exclusively used to indicate wrong ritual practice. So it's all alive, it's all in doing. Compare that modern use of the word, a specific use of the word metaphor, not the Lake of Johnson one. But when we say that Jesus walked on water, that was a metaphor of him producing extensive portions and rations of fish and bread. Those are metaphorical. That word doesn't mean anything, and since there is no doing, there can be no miracles either. There are deadened words that do not have the connection in the language game anymore. Here we see live words, and that's why libation cups, wine presses are used They can show the wrath of God, but also his almighty goodness. If we go to page 7, second paragraph, we have another from Meredith. If it is clear that wine and libation imagery is used in Revelation in such a way to imply God's judgment, that is, to unleash suffering upon those who worship incorrectly and thereby participate fully in the sinful excess of the empire. In what context should we interpret the use of libation in Revelation? It's something that's used in liturgy. Therefore, it becomes potent. And its potency is dependent on the numbers of the doing, how many do it, how intensely they do it, and all those factors. The word metaphor, previously mentioned by me, serves none of those. It is vacuous, empty, bearing no meaning whatsoever. And if you go to page 9 here, yeah, I found something at 8. The quote here from Philo: friendships are formed between those who hitherto knew not each other, and the sacrifices and libations are the occasion of reciprocity of feeling, and constitute the surest pledge that all are of one mind. They share the doings, therefore they do the same thing, and it has the same meaning. Meaning is not flying about in a transcendental world. It's deeply connected to what you do, and not doing anything or very little will make it very light, not dense, not saying anything, not speaking. Those will be words without effect, passivity. And go to page 9. Second paragraph. It is in this context that we observe first how Revelation's liquid offerings highlights the cosmically inappropriate ritual actions of the whore of Babylon, Rome herself, whose libations the author simultaneously evokes and criticizes. So it becomes a very strong argument grounded in intention and doings against the whore of Babylon, that is Rome. It strengthens it. And later you can see, in describing the whore's liquid offerings, Revelation cleverly paradises the highly structured ritual behaviors required for the imperial court and its cult. So this is how it used to be, very different from today. Now it's even chairs to sit on with 6 corners. 3 chairs making up 666. I'm not the first one to make that conclusion. But passivity will sort of make words much, much less. Kalle, maybe some comments?
Yes, let's go to page 8. This place here on page 8. The biblical use of libations is reinterpreted in Revelation in keeping with its use of Babylon as metaphor for Rome, another foreign oppressor, and is a focal point for its wine and libation imagery. Why most scholars take it as evident that Babylon is a code word that is a symbol for Rome, or metaphor for Rome. But I say it could also be a symbol for Jerusalem. So I say Babylon is a metaphor both for Rome and Jerusalem. And I will actually, speaking of cups and bottles, I will show an image that has lots. The famous Klein bottle illustrate this issue in homage of cups and bottles. It's very appropriate.
Very appropriate. Very good, Kalle.
Let me take how to. Now I suppose that people who are listening to this doesn't know anything about the Klein bottle, and here you have it. So to say, perhaps Hans, you could say some views because you can describe it. But what I can understand is, so you have an outside going out here, and then it becomes an inside. But there is no distinction between the outside. The point is that there is no distinction between the outside and the inside. Hans, please.
Exactly. The inside and the outside is the same thing in the Klein bottle. And this is the true working of space. This is how space works. So it's also volume here. So the surrounding area of the Klein bottle and the inside, if you go down to this spot, I don't know if you can see my pointer here, it's actually outside, the volume of the outside that can come in to make the volume of the inside. Inside and outside are deeply connected. They are actually prerequisite for each other.
And to explain my point with the Klein bottle, so let's imagine that Babylon, we have Babylon here. Babylon is the great city, symbol for all evil. But it also refers to two concrete cities. We have Rome. Rome could be the outside enemy. So we could say this is, say Rome, which is going outside here. But then you have also the inside enemy, Jerusalem. How is Jerusalem an inside enemy? Yes, because Christians were criticizing Jerusalem symbol for the Jewish worship. Jerusalem, who had killed the prophets and Jesus and so forth.
Yeah, indeed.
So I would say that John killed two birds with one stone. So he made his image of Babylon ambiguous because he wanted to, so to say, kill two birds with one stone, the outer enemy, Rome,
yes,
and the inside enemy, the bad Jerusalem, who had killed the prophets.
Oh yeah, very good. Wow. Fantastic. They are in one, but also different.
And I would say that all scholars, so majority of scholars think that Babylon is a symbol for Rome. A minority of scholars say that Babylon is a metaphor for Jerusalem. But nobody says that Babylon is a symbol both for Rome and Jerusalem, except for me. And Klein bottle is an excellent metaphor for it, especially in context of this paper about cups and bottles. And let me also give examples from the text itself that you can use. Meredith Warren's arguments to show, let me see, reinterpreted. I wrote down some Greek keywords.
Yes.
Reinterpreted. No, it not was. I already mentioned this, but then the word intermingle. So we have it here. This is very important. In no instance in Ezekiel is the wrath poured out against foreign peoples in favor of Israelites. Rather, God's wrath is reserved for situations where God's own people have intermingled their ritual practices with those of other nations. So this would speak against what Meredith, Professor Warren said, that Babylon is the symbol of Babylon symbol for Rome, because Rome is the foreign enemy. And we read here, Ezekiel is in the practice poured out against foreign people. Excuse me, God's wrath is reserved for those where so God is actually punishing his own people, that is Jerusalem.
Yes.
So in this case, using Ezekiel, you could say that Babylon cannot be Rome, because God doesn't attack foreign peoples, and in this case, when he's speaking about intermingling. Do you follow me?
Yes, very interesting. Yes, indeed.
And another keyword, the last keyword that I want to take up here is infiltration. Infiltration. Okay, so just as the pouring out of God's wrath in Ezekiel is connected to the Israelites' participation in foreign worship, so too in Revelation it is not actions of outsiders that is at stake, but the infiltration of those practices into his own congregations. So we have the inside enemy here, not Rome. Rome is not the inside enemy. Inside enemy is, so to say, the Israelites that did not follow God's practices. And so this is the intermingling, infiltration. But I want only to highlight these two passages. But still, we have to remember from Sedman's paper. You remember Sedman's paper about language game in Revelation? Is that Revelation is a new language game?
Yes.
So okay, Ezekiel has these rules, but Revelation is a new language game. So God can actually attack both Rome and Jerusalem in favor of Christians. So to put it otherwise, he will, so to say, crush the whole bottle, Klein bottle.
Oh yeah.
Or if you think fine inside, it's both inside. It's a poisonous wine, so to say, from God's point of view. That both internal and external enemy will be crushed. And I would say that this really would, so to say, heal Revelation, the book of Revelation, because in the following centuries, especially the 19th century, many Christian sects, including Luther himself, they used Revelation in the ammunition to attack Vatican and the Pope. But if you see it as a Klein bottle more, like that Babylon is not only Rome, but it's also in Jerusalem. That is church internal enemies, you would say, like Lutherans themselves. So you could have.
It's very good.
So Klein bottle could, I would say, heal the book of Revelation and relationships between Catholics and Protestants. When you understand the ambiguous nature of Babylon as symbol both for Jerusalem, internal enemies, so to say, and outside enemies, Rome.
Yes. The absolute precondition, the climate shows, and we get that from Stephen M. Rosen, for there to be any difference, there needs to be sameness. And many people today, they try to use words as they're not participatory. The only way to participate is to have the opposite going on. Remember what I said earlier about Wittgenstein. Old man is walking up a hill. It can also be seen as he's sliding down the hill. These two features of reality are important to have any feature. Giving them up, we lose everything.
Indeed, absolutely, Hans. And you said a very important point is that the internal and the external goals, there are no clear boundaries between them. And let's say that Protestants like Luther, they could attack Rome for the pagan origins, like Sunday worship or whatever. Like Seventh-day Adventists today, they say that you shouldn't celebrate or you should not worship God on Sundays. Instead, you should worship God on Saturdays. That was a pagan invention, so to say, pagan innovation. But you could use that. Where does the pagan practices, how do they, so to say, get separated? So it's not really easy to say, or Klampoto shows that you cannot actually separate so-called practice. It's difficult to separate pagan practices. Or rather, you could say that you can actually purify pagan practices, perhaps in a bottle. Or would you agree that you can say the Jews didn't have their holiday on Sunday; they had it on Friday and Saturday. But you can actually purify, so to say, pagan practices and adopt them into Christian. Or would you agree?
Why, yes, indeed. It shows also a movement. There is a movement that's only possible when you have what normally is called oppositions. But you see, this is how space actually is. It's not three-dimensional. It's not a clear inside and a clear outside. You need this one-sidedness because in actuality, the Klein bottle is just a flat surface that makes these wonderful things. So the movement is important. And we know since earlier, if nothing moves, it has no meaning. And it's a bit what Derrida is pointing out when it comes to Jacques Monod and Bernard Kengelhem. Their text becomes stale and static because they got hung up on contradictions. They try to use contradictions as levels to get any little meaning into what they're writing, any meaning into the words. And what it becomes of in the end, it's not even wrong. It doesn't have any force to it. This is forceful. Kleinbottle is forceful. It is participatory, and it makes the whole difference.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's also beautiful.
Absolutely. Well, perhaps we should end there for today.
Well, thank you very much for a very interesting insight here. I forgot about the Klein bottle. God forbid, how could that happen? Thank you for bringing it in, and I'm the one who should remember it. I have one at home, not as sturdy as the one that you showed there, but I do have one. I say thank you for participating in 1759. Thank you everyone for listening in. Have a very good morning, day, afternoon, or night, wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Thank you.